Get ready for an exciting iPad journey in 2024. Apple is gearing up for a complete refresh of its iPad lineup in 2024, and the iPad Air 6 generation is in the spotlight. Expected early this year, it won't have the fancy OLED screen like the Pro. But here's the twist. The iPad Air 6th Gen is set to come in not one, but two different sizes. Curious to know more? We've got all the latest news, rumors, and buzz about the iPad Air 6 Gen. Let's dive into the excitement. iPad Air 6 release date. The latest details on the upcoming iPad Air suggest that Apple is gearing up to launch new iPads and MacBook models in March 2024. This lineup is expected to feature an OLED iPad Pro, an M3 MacBook Air, and the long-anticipated 6th generation iPad Air. Given Apple's history of hosting events in March to unveil new products, this scenario appears quite likely. iPad Air 6 price. Over the years, the iPad Air has maintained its straightforward pricing strategy. Both for the iPad Air 4th and 5th generation, the base model with 64GB storage and Wi-Fi starts at $599, while the higher-end 256GB version kicks off at $749. Unless Apple decides to alter the storage options or introduce a super premium feature from the iPad Pro lineup, we anticipate the iPad Air 6 generation to follow suit in pricing. That translates to an expected $599 for the 64GB version and $749 for the 256GB variant. iPad Air 6 – Naming, Models, and Options. The next iPad Air, probably called iPad Air 6 Gen, might come in two versions. One would have a regular 10.9-inch screen, while the other could be a bigger 12.9-inch iPad Air. Like the iPad Pro, Apple wants to give more choices at different prices, especially for those who want a larger screen but don't want to pay extra for the iPad Pro. When it comes to the regular iPad Air 6 Gen, there could be two versions. One would be for Wi-Fi only, identified by the code names J507, and the other would be for both Wi-Fi and cellular connectivity, identified by the code J508. The larger 12.9-inch version might have similar options with the codes J537 and J538, representing the different ways you can connect to the internet. iPad Air 6 camera. What to expect? When it comes to cameras on the iPad Air 6, the rumor suggests that it will stick to a single camera setup. Unlike the fancier iPad Pro, which has double camera setup and cool LiDAR scanner for AR fun, the iPad Air prefers to keep it straightforward. While a dual camera setup might be a highlight for the iPad Pro, the iPad Air 6 is more likely to see a modest upgrade to the rear camera specs. The previous models, the iPad Air 4 and iPad Air 5, both featured a 12-megapixel camera capable of recording 4K at 60 frames per second videos, which was pretty decent for a tablet. However, it's reasonable to expect a bit of enhancement in the camera department for the iPad Air 6 Gen. On the other hand, the iPad Air 5th Gen brought a significant improvement to the front-facing camera, bumping it up to 12 megapixel and introducing the center stage feature to keep you centered during video calls. So we might not see major changes in this area for the iPad Air 6. iPad Air 6 expected storage options. Since the iPad Air 3rd Gen, Apple has stuck to two storage choices for each new iPad Air: 64GB and 256GB. While tradition suggests the iPad Air 6th Gen will likely follow suit, many hope for a pleasant surprise: a base storage of 128GB and, perhaps, the introduction of a roomier 512GB option alongside the familiar 256GB. This potential expansion in storage would not only add an extra layer of excitement to the iPad Air 6, but could also be a game-changer for those upgrading from an older model with 64GB or less. iPad Air 6 design. The iPad Air 6's design details are a bit of a mystery for now, but it's expected to keep things familiar without major changes. The iPad Air 4th Gen brought in a new modern look with flat edges, similar to the iPhone 12, 13, and 14 series, complemented by uniform bezels and the integration of Touch ID right into the power button. Considering Apple's recent trend of adopting a consistent design across its iPad lineup, it's likely that the iPad Air 6 will adhere to this aesthetic. While we might see some minor adjustments, the focus could be on introducing more color choices to add a splash of variety. iPad Air 6. Features and specs expectations. The current iPad Air uses the M1 chip, which is a bit behind the iPad Pro. But here's the exciting part. When the next iPad Air rolls around, it's expected to step up its game. If the refresh happens soon, all fingers are pointing to the M2 chip taking the stage. Now, looking into 2024, if we start seeing Macs rocking the M3 chip, there's a possibility the iPad Air 6 might get a piece of that action too. While early leaks have hinted at the iPad Air 6 rocking the M2 chip, it's important to remember that Apple's plans can always shift, and nothing is certain until the official announcement. iPad Air 6. Battery and charging. Let's talk about the iPad Air 6 and what's in store for its battery and charging. In the iPad Air 5th Gen, the M1 chip ensured it could last a whole day. If the battery size in the iPad Air 6th Gen doesn't change much, we can probably expect a battery that lasts just as long. And here's the deal. If Apple decides to stick with the M1 chip instead of switching to the M2 in the iPad Air 6th Gen, you can count on enjoying the same fantastic battery life. iPad Air 6. What's coming in software? When the iPad Air 6th Gen shows up, we'll already know the lowdown on the upcoming iPad OS 17. Apple usually spills the beans at the WWDC Developer Summit, and that usually happens around early June. Now, here's the interesting part. iPad OS 17 might borrow cool stuff from iOS 16 that didn't make it to iPad OS 16, like lock screen customization. Could these be the stars of iPad OS 17? Seems likely. We could also see improvements in Stage Manager and how multitasking works on iPads. So the big question now, should you wait for the iPad Air 6 generation? Whether to wait for the iPad Air 6 depends on your current iPad situation. If you're using an older iPad Air or a regular iPad that's showing its age, holding out for the iPad Air 6 could be a smart move. The current iPad Air 5th Gen is already impressive, but if you've refrained from upgrading, waiting for potential improvements in the 6th Gen might be worthwhile. On the other hand, if you've recently upgraded to the iPad Air 5th Gen or are accustomed to the features of an iPad Pro, waiting for the iPad Air 6 may not be necessary. The anticipated changes may not be substantial compared to the 5th Gen, and the iPad Pro lineup offers more advanced features. Unless a compelling discount comes along, an immediate switch to the iPad Air 6 might not be a priority. That's all for today. See you in the next one.